The parking lot was empty except for her car and a shadow leaning against the driver's side door. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd only stopped to grab gas. But something about the way she laughed, soft and low, caught my attention. I stayed in my truck, engine off, watching as she stepped closer to him. Her hand lingered on his chest, and then it happened. She kissed him. It wasn't quick. It wasn't innocent. But let me tell you from the beginning. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said she was the love of my life. Her name was Hannah, and from the moment we met, it felt like we were meant to be. We were both 18, fresh out of high school in our small town where everyone knew everyone. She had this magnetic energy about her, the kind of girl who could walk into a room and make it brighter just by smiling. And I fell for her, hard. Our relationship was the envy of everyone we knew. People would say we were relationship goals, and for a long time, I believed them. We were the couple who went on road trips, had lazy Sundays on the couch, and celebrated anniversaries with candlelit dinners. We talked about our future, buying a house, starting a family, all the things that felt like a distant dream but somehow real when we were together. But looking back, there were cracks in the foundation even then. At first, they were so small I barely noticed them. A few months before things fell apart, she started spending more time on her phone. I didn't think much of it. She had friends, just like I did, and I wasn't the type to pry. But the laughter that used to fill our house grew quieter. The conversations that once lasted for hours were replaced with her scrolling through her phone while I sat in silence. Then came the late nights. Hannah had always been a social butterfly, so when she started going out with friends more often, I didn't question it. She'd kiss me goodbye, promise not to be too late, and come home smelling like cheap vodka and stale cigarette smoke. I told myself it was normal. People in their 20s go out, right? But there was something about the way she'd avoid my eyes when I asked how her night went, how her answers were always just a little too vague. I brushed it off. I trusted her. Then there were the excuses. She started working later, or so she said. I'd text her during her shifts, and sometimes it would take hours for her to reply. When I asked about it, she'd laugh it off, saying she was busy or her phone had died. I believed her because I didn't want to think otherwise. The first real red flag came on a Saturday night. We planned a date, just dinner and a movie, nothing fancy, but she canceled last minute, saying she wasn't feeling well. I stayed home to take care of her, but she insisted I go out with my brother and his friends instead. You deserve a night out, she said, smiling weakly from the couch. When I got home later that night, she wasn't there. I remember pacing the living room, my phone in hand, debating whether to call her. It wasn't like her to just disappear. When she finally walked through the door, her makeup smudged and her hair a mess, she brushed past me with a casual, "I went for a drive to clear my head." I wanted to believe her, so I did. The thing about red flags is that they're easy to miss when you're in love. I convinced myself I was overthinking, that she was just going through a rough patch. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cracks in our relationship grew wider with each passing day. She became more distant, more secretive. I'd catch her whispering on the phone or quickly locking her screen when I walked into the room. Once, I found a second phone charger in her car, a detail so small it shouldn't have mattered, but it gnawed at me. I tried to talk to her about it, to understand what was going on. Every time, she'd reassure me with the same tired lines. "You're imagining things. You know I love you. Don't you trust me?" And I did. Or at least I wanted to. Looking back now, I realize I was blind. Love does that to you. It makes you ignore the obvious, convincing yourself that everything's fine even when it's falling apart. At the time, I thought we were just in a rough patch, something we'd get through together. I had no idea I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to be pushed off. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow unraveling, a series of moments that don't make sense until it's too late. If I'd known then what I know now, maybe I would have seen the signs sooner. Maybe I would have saved myself the heartbreak. But at the time, I was just a guy in love, holding on to a relationship that was already slipping through my fingers. And that's how it all began. The night I started to see the truth was supposed to be like any other. We'd been together for 5 years by then, and though things hadn't been perfect lately, I still believed in us. We were heading out for a joyride, a little tradition of ours that we'd started back in high school. Just a drive down the back roads, a few beers, some music, and the open night sky. It wasn't just us that night, though. My younger brother, Caleb, and his new fling, Emma, tagged along. Caleb had been pestering me to hang out more, and I figured a low-key night would do us all some good. Hannah seemed unusually cheerful as we piled into the car, laughing and teasing Caleb in a way that felt different. I brushed it off as her just being friendly. We drove for a while, the four of us joking and singing along to old country songs. After a couple of beers, I started feeling the buzz and decided to call it early. I had an early shift the next morning, and while I wasn't one to shy away from a drink, I didn't want to overdo it. "Go on without me," I told them as Hannah pulled up to drop me off. "Don't have too much fun." Hannah leaned over, kissing me quickly but with an almost distracted air. "We'll be back soon," she said, her smile a little too bright. I climbed out, watched them drive away, and headed inside, not giving it another thought. I woke up in the middle of the night, my bladder dragging me out of a dreamless sleep. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that makes you realize something's off. I reached over, half asleep, and felt the cold, empty space where Hannah should have been. Frowning, I grabbed my phone off the nightstand. No texts. No missed calls. The clock read 2:17 a.m. I shot her a quick message, "Hey, you okay?" No response. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest as I stumbled to the bathroom. She'd stayed out late before, but this felt different. Something about the way she'd kissed me goodbye, the way she'd laughed just a little too much at Caleb's jokes, lingered in the back of my mind. By the time my alarm went off a few hours later, she was home. I heard her before I saw her, the soft rustle of her jacket being tossed onto the chair, the clink of her keys hitting the counter. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was already pouring herself a glass of water, looking far too energetic for someone who'd been out all night. "Hey, babe," she said, smiling as if nothing was wrong. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just driving around," she said with a shrug. "You know how Caleb gets, he wanted to keep the night going." I nodded, though something about her answer didn't sit right with me. Caleb wasn't exactly the life of the party type, and it wasn't like him to stay out late, especially with work in the morning. Still, I let it go. A few days later, I noticed something strange. I'd left my jacket in the car the night of the joyride and went out to grab it. As I opened the door, a faint but unmistakable smell hit me. It was a mix of sweat and cheap cologne, but it wasn't mine. I froze, my mind racing. Maybe Caleb had left something behind? Or maybe it was just my imagination. I searched the car for any other clues, but everything seemed normal. Still, the smell lingered in my mind, a tiny thread pulling at the edges of my thoughts. The rail break came a week later. I was cleaning up the living room when I found her phone wedged between the couch cushions. It wasn't unusual for Hannah to misplace her phone, she was always losing it, but something made me hesitate before handing it back. I unlocked it, my stomach churning with guilt even as I justified it to myself. I wasn't trying to invade her privacy. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Her messages were clean, almost too clean. But when I opened her gallery, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photo. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't have to be. It was her, sitting in the driver's seat of her car, with Caleb leaning in close. His arm was draped over her shoulder, their faces too close for comfort. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, 1,000 thoughts rushing through my head. Was this real? Was I imagining things? When she came home that evening, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding crazy, without admitting that I'd gone through her phone. But the picture was burned into my mind, and suddenly, All the little red flags I'd ignored over the past few months seemed impossible to ignore. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed how often she'd glance at her phone, the way she'd step outside to take calls she claimed were from work. I caught her texting late at night, her face glowing in the dark as she whispered excuses when I asked who it was. It was like I'd been handed a puzzle, and every new detail was another piece. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I could feel it taking shape, and I knew it wasn't going to be something I wanted to see. The discovery wasn't one big moment. It was a series of little things, each one cutting deeper than the last. And even though I didn't have all the answers yet, one thing was becoming painfully clear: the woman I thought I knew was keeping secrets, and I was about to find out just how deep they went. I didn't plan to confront her right away. At first, I told myself I needed more proof, something undeniable. But deep down, I think I was just stalling. I wasn't ready to face the truth, wasn't ready to admit that the woman I loved might be lying to me. For a while, I played along. I acted normal, even when every instinct screamed at me to ask questions. I laughed at her jokes, kissed her goodnight, and pretended not to notice when she turned her phone screen away from me. But the weight of what I'd seen, the photo of her and Caleb, the late nights, the little lies, ate away at me until I couldn't hold it in anymore. It happened one evening, a couple of weeks after I'd found the photo. She came home later than usual, her excuse this time being, "Work ran late." I was sitting on the couch when she walked in, and something about the way she breezed past me, her tone too casual, too rehearsed, snapped whatever thread of patience I had left. "Hannah," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "We need to talk." She paused, her hand still on the strap of her purse. "About what?" "About where you've been." Her eyes narrowed slightly, just enough for me to catch it before she smoothed her expression. "I told you, I was at work." I stood up, crossing the room to face her. "Don't lie to me, Hannah." Her lips parted, a flicker of something, panic, crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm not lying." I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking as I opened the photo I'd found weeks ago. I held it up to her, my voice breaking as I said, "Then explain this." Her face went pale. For a second, she just stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. Then she laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound that made my stomach turn. "Are you serious?" she said, crossing her arms defensively. "You're upset over that?" "It's nothing, just a stupid picture. Caleb and I were messing around. Don't make it weird." "Don't make it weird?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're in the car with my brother, looking like you're about to." I stopped myself, the words catching in my throat. "Hannah, what the hell is going on?" Her eyes flashed with anger, her defensive walls slamming into place. "Nothing is going on." "God, you're being paranoid." "It's just a picture, for Christ's sake." "Then why didn't you tell me about it?" I shot back. "Why didn't you tell me you were hanging out with Caleb that night after you dropped me off?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the cracks in her facade. "I didn't think it mattered," she said finally, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I knew you'd overreact, just like you're doing now." "Overreact?" I felt my chest tighten, the anger boiling over. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, acting like I'm crazy for noticing, and I'm the one overreacting?" She rolled her eyes, her tone shifting to something colder. "I'm not sneaking around. You're just insecure, always looking for something to be upset about." "Insecure?" The word hit me like a slap. "Hannah, don't try to turn this around on me. I know something's going on, and I'm not letting this go until you tell me the truth." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Then, with a sigh, she said, "Fine. You want the truth? Caleb and I hung out that night. We had a few drinks, talked, and that's it. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why hide it?" "Because I knew you'd freak out," she snapped. "You're always so quick to assume the worst." I didn't want to deal with this exact conversation. I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her at her word and let it go. But another part, the part that had been piecing together all the little inconsistencies over the past few months, knew better. Swear to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Swear on everything that nothing happened between you and Caleb. She hesitated again, and in that hesitation, I saw the truth. Hannah, I said, my voice breaking. Did you sleep with him? Her eyes darted to the floor, her arms tightening around herself. No, she said, but the word was too quick, too hollow. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice rising again. Just tell me the truth. I didn't sleep with him, she shouted, her voice cracking. It was just a kiss, okay? It didn't mean anything. The room went silent. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. A kiss? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. It was a mistake, she said quickly, her voice desperate now. I was drunk, he was there, and it just happened. But it didn't mean anything. I swear. I turned away from her, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process what I'd just heard. My girlfriend of 5 years, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, had kissed my own brother. And the worst part? I didn't believe for a second that it had stopped at a kiss. I can't do this right now, I said finally, my voice barely steady. I need some air. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the middle of the living room, her excuses echoing in my ears. As I sat in my truck, staring out at the dark, empty street, I realized that everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been a lie. And the truth? The truth was going to destroy me. I don't remember much about the drive that night, just that it felt endless. The cold air from the cracked window stung my face, but I didn't care. I needed to feel something, anything, other than the twisting, suffocating ache in my chest. Hannah's words echoed in my mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. It was just a kiss. It didn't mean anything. How many times had she lied to my face, telling me I was paranoid, insecure, imagining things? And Caleb, my own brother. How could he? I pulled into the empty parking lot of a gas station, killed the engine, and just sat there. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt anger rising in waves, threatening to crash over me, but underneath it all was something worse, heartbreak. This wasn't just about the kiss. It was about trust, about all the moments I'd defended her in my mind, telling myself I was overthinking, that she'd never do something like this. 5 years of memories, of plans, of believing we were building something real, all of it felt tainted now. For hours I sat there, replaying every moment in my head. The late nights, the missed calls, the way she'd laughed just a little too hard at Caleb's jokes. Every detail that I'd brushed off as nothing suddenly felt like a neon sign screaming you should have seen this coming. When I finally got home, the house was dark. She was in bed, pretending to be asleep, but I could hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at her silhouette, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the stranger I now saw her as. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, made coffee, and asked if I wanted eggs. It was surreal, watching her move around the kitchen like we weren't standing on the edge of a cliff. "I'm sorry about last night," she said, her voice soft, almost shy. "I know I should have told you about Caleb. I just didn't want to hurt you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word out of her mouth felt like a slap, a reminder that she'd already hurt me in ways I couldn't even begin to process. The days that followed were a blur of emotions I didn't know how to handle. Anger came first, sharp and hot, making me want to punch walls, scream at her, at Caleb, at the universe. But the anger always faded, leaving behind a hollow ache that felt impossible to fill. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw them together, her laughing at something he'd said, him leaning in just a little too close. The image of that photo was burned into my brain, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. At work, I was a mess. My boss pulled me aside more than once, asking if everything was okay. I lied, of course, saying I was just tired, but the truth was I didn't even know how to explain what I was feeling. I tried talking to a couple of friends, but their reactions only made things worse. "Man, that's rough," one of them said, patting me on the back like I'd just lost a game, not the person I thought I'd spend my life with. Another told me to just move on. As if it were that simple. The only person I wanted to talk to was Caleb, but every time I thought about calling him, the anger bubbled back up. What could I even say? Why did you do it? How could you do this to me? I knew I wouldn't get the answers I wanted. Hannah tried to make things right in her own way. She'd cook dinner, plan date nights, even leave little notes around the house like she used to when we first started dating. But every gesture felt hollow, a bandage on a wound too deep to heal. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty beer bottle in my hand. I thought about the first time we'd kissed, the way she'd laughed, and pulled me closer like I was the only person in the world. I thought about the plans we'd made, the life we were supposed to have together. And then I thought about her and Caleb. The betrayal wasn't just in the kiss. It was in the lies, the gaslighting, the way she made me doubt myself over and over again. It was in the fact that she'd taken something sacred, our trust, our love, and shattered it without a second thought. Eventually, the sadness turned inward. I started questioning everything about myself. Was I not enough for her? Had I done something wrong, something to push her away? I replayed every argument, every moment of doubt, trying to pinpoint where it had all gone wrong. But no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find an answer. I stopped going out. Stopped answering calls. I withdrew into myself, drowning in a sea of self-doubt and regret. Even when I was around people, I felt alone, like I was carrying a weight no one else could see. The worst part was that I still loved her. Even after everything, there was a part of me that wanted to forgive her, to pretend none of it had happened and go back to the way things were. But I knew I couldn't. Because every time I looked at her, I saw him. And every time I looked at myself, I saw a fool. It took weeks before I realized I couldn't keep living like that. The pain wasn't going to go away on its own, and no amount of pretending could change what had happened. I didn't know what the future looked like or how I was going to get through it, but one thing was clear: something had to change. The man I was before, the man who trusted too easily, who believed in love without question, was gone. And in his place was someone I barely recognized, someone who had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and start over. But before I could do that, I had to make a decision. Stay or go. Forgive or walk away. The choice was mine. And no matter what I decided, I knew one thing for sure: I'd never be the same. The moment of clarity came on a Sunday morning. The house was quiet, sunlight filtering through the blinds in soft, uneven stripes. Hannah was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she made coffee. It was a painfully normal scene, one that should have felt comforting, but instead, it felt like a lie. I'd spent the past few weeks living in limbo, torn between the man who wanted to fight for the relationship and the man who knew it was already dead. I'd gone over every possibility in my head 1,000 times. Could I forgive her? Could I move past the betrayal, rebuild the trust? Or would it always be there, lingering in the background, poisoning everything we tried to salvage? I knew what my heart wanted. Despite everything, I still loved her. That was the cruel irony of it all. Love didn't just disappear because someone hurt you. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. That morning, as I watched her move around the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened, I realized the answer had been staring me in the face all along. I couldn't stay. When I told her, her reaction wasn't what I expected. I thought she'd fight, beg me to reconsider, promise to do whatever it took to fix things. Instead, she just stared at me, her face blank, like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Is this really what you want?" she asked finally, her voice calm, almost detached. "No," I admitted, my throat tight. "It's not what I want. But it's what I need." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "I thought we could move past this," she said quietly. "I thought. I don't know, that we were stronger than this." "We were," I said, the words heavy. "But you broke something, Hannah. And I don't know how to put it back together." For a moment I thought she might cry. But then she straightened, her expression hardening into something I couldn't quite place. "Fine," she said, her voice sharp. "If that's how you feel, then go. But don't pretend you're some saint in all of this. You're not perfect either." Her words stung, but I didn't take the bait. This wasn't about assigning blame or keeping score. It was about letting go of something that had already fallen apart. The next few days were a whirlwind of packing and logistics. I moved in with a friend temporarily, leaving behind the house we'd built together, the life we'd shared. It was strange, watching everything I'd worked for unravel so quickly, like a thread being pulled from a sweater until there was nothing left. Hannah didn't try to stop me. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at my friend's door demanding answers. Part of me was relieved, but another part, the part that still loved her, felt hollow, like I'd been discarded just as easily as I'd walked away. Leaving wasn't the end of the pain. If anything, it was just the beginning. The nights were the hardest, lying awake in a strange bed, haunted by memories of her laugh, her touch, the way she used to curl up next to me like I was her safe place. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected started to happen. The anger began to fade. The sadness, too. It didn't go away completely, it still lingered in quiet moments, a dull ache that reminded me of what I'd lost, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been. I started to focus on myself for the first time in years. I picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from, even started going to therapy. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One evening, months after I'd left, I got a text from Caleb. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to respond. In the end, I decided to meet him. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. We met at a bar, the same one we'd gone to countless times growing up. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his beer as I sat down across from him. "I'm sorry," he said before I could even speak. "For everything. I was drunk, stupid, and I didn't think about what it would do to you. If I could take it back, I would." His apology felt genuine, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I needed to hear you say that." He nodded, his shoulders slumping in relief. "I get it. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Walking out of that bar, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of anger and resentment was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. Hannah and I never spoke again after I left. Last I heard, she moved out of town, started a new job, maybe even a new relationship. I didn't want to know the details. What mattered was that I'd made my choice. I'd taken the first step toward healing, toward building a life that wasn't defined by her betrayal. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It's been over a year since I walked away from Hannah and the life we built together. If you'd told me back then that I'd be where I am now, I wouldn't have believed you. I felt so broken, so lost, like I'd never be able to piece myself back together. But time has a way of softening even the deepest wounds, and looking back, I realized now that leaving was the best decision I ever made. The pain didn't disappear overnight. It took months of soul-searching, of confronting my own insecurities and doubts, to start feeling whole again. Therapy helped more than I thought it would. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally invested, who could see things objectively, gave me the clarity I desperately needed. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that her betrayal wasn't a reflection of me. It wasn't about what I did or didn't do, or whether I was enough. It was about her choices, her flaws, and the way she handled her own unhappiness. Once I stopped blaming myself, I started to heal. I've spent a lot of time thinking about Caleb, too. For a while, I wrestled with whether to cut him out of my life completely. But family is complicated, and forgiveness isn't always black and white. We're not close, and I don't think we ever will be, but I've made peace with what happened. He's working on himself, trying to be better, and that's all I can ask for. As for Hannah, I don't think about her as much anymore. The memories are still there, but they feel distant, like they belong to someone else. I don't hate her. I don't think I ever really did. What I feel now is more like indifference, and that, I've learned, is the true opposite of love. If there's one thing I'd want anyone reading this to take away, it's this: betrayal doesn't have to define you. It's a chapter in your story, not the whole book. The pain is real, and it's awful, but it doesn't last forever. You'll get through it, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. And when you do, you'll realize that the person you become, the person who survives, is stronger than you ever thought possible. For me, life didn't end with Hannah's betrayal. In a way, it began. I've learned to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of love, even if it scares me. I'm not the same person I was before, and I'm okay with that. Because now I know my worth. And I'll never settle for less than I deserve again. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.